Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Our party, my colleague Liam Kerr, submitted an amendment to the Victims Bill to secure a grooming gangs inquiry in Scotland. The Justice Secretary, Angela Constance, rejected it and said that further inquiries were not necessary. She told Parliament that a leading expert, Professor Alexis Jay, shares my view. Now, that was a direct quote. But Professor Jay does not share Angela Constance's view. That's right. In an email to the Justice Secretary, which we forced the government to release, Professor Jay says that her views had, and I quote, nothing to do with Mr Kerr's amendment or the position in Scotland. Untrue. Professor Jay asked for her position to be clarified. So can John Swinney explain why his Justice Secretary did not correct the parliamentary record?
First Minister.
The comments that the Justice Secretary made in the Stage 3 proceedings on the Victims and Witnesses Bill were, as I said to Mr Finlay last week, a reflection of the general comments that were made about the issues at that time. And, of course, the issues that Professor Jay raised were corrected in the minutes of the National Childhood Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Group, which were, of course, published as a consequence of that meeting and the release to the public of that information, which clarified the point that Professor Jay was concerned about. Russell
Finlay. Let's hear Mr Finlay.
That answer might have held water last week, but it doesn't anymore, First Minister. The Justice Secretary brazenly misrepresented a leading child abuse expert in order to block a grooming gang inquiry in Scotland. The Ministerial Code requires government ministers to correct any error at the earliest opportunity. And it also states, quoting, ministers who knowingly mislead the Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation to the First Minister. The Justice Secretary misrepresented an expert, then denied doing so when asked by journalists. She failed to correct the record, and she's not even apologised. So why isn't it obvious to John Swinney that she has broken the Ministerial Code?
First Minister.
For the reasons that I've set out in my earlier answer and also in my answers last week, that the Justice Secretary was making a general comment in the Victims and Witnesses Bill. And the issue about which Professor Jay was concerned has been addressed in the minutes of the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Group. And what the Government is doing, which is what the Justice Secretary was setting out to Parliament at that time and which has been set out to Parliament on numerous occasions, is taking forward the essential work which is necessary to make a judgment about whether a separate grooming gangs inquiry is required, because the view that has been expressed to us is that the evidence base is not sufficient to take such a decision at this time. And as I've pointed out to Mr Finlay before, even if the amendment had been passed by Parliament on that occasion, there would not have been any ability to take forward that amendment into a grooming gangs inquiry, because it relied on the appointment
First Minister, sorry. This session is for scrutiny, and it's difficult to have that when we cannot hear one another. First Minister.
But that amendment relied upon the appointment of a Victims Commissioner who has not yet been established in office and cannot take the action that was proposed there. So what the Government is doing is addressing the substance of the issue to ensure that we have the ability to come to the correct conclusion on the steps that we have to take.
Russell Finlay.
I know that Angela Constance wasn't making a general point. Everyone in here knows Angela Constance wasn't making a general point. John Swinney knows that Angela Constance was not making a general point. She twisted a statement about England to deny victims an inquiry here in Scotland.
Yes.
Professor Jay then asked her to correct this falsehood on the 26th of September, but she didn't, and she still hasn't done so. And then, on the 25th of November, Angela Constance doubled down. She told the media that she had not misrepresented Alexis Jay. And we only know about this now, in December, because we've dragged it out of this secretive government. Grooming gang victims were failed by the authorities, and they're now being failed again by this SNP government.
Yes,
how can they trust John Swinney and his Justice Secretary to deliver the honest answers that they deserve?
First Minister.
One of the points I've been trying to stress to Parliament in the handling of this important issue, and I recognise its importance, is the care the Government has got to take about decisions about a grooming gangs inquiry, given the role of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry that this Government established in 2015. Now, earlier on this week, Lady Smith, who chairs the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, set out the basis of the Phase 10 hearings of the Child Abuse Inquiry. And I quote from the inquiry's press statement: "It should be noted that where any conduct which constitutes grooming is alleged, the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry is able to investigate it if overall the circumstances in which it occurred are within its terms of reference. Grooming which took place out with the establishments themselves may, depending on particular circumstances, be within the terms of reference." Now, the Government has established already a statutory public inquiry that has the ability, as Lady Smith has confirmed, to examine issues in relation to grooming gangs. And that is some of the work the Government has to take care to make sure that we properly respect the independent inquiry that we have established by statute, which has the power to look at many of these issues.
Russell Finlay.
Desperate deflection. The SNP have repeatedly closed the door to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry for grooming gang victims in the past, and they will continue to do so. On Tuesday, I met a grooming gang victim known as Taylor, along with her mother. They then, that afternoon, went to meet John Swinney. They, along with other victims, have lost all trust in Angela Constance.
No surprise.
John Swinney is continuing to defend a Justice Secretary who misrepresented an expert, misled Parliament, misled the public and misled victims. Everyone in this chamber, no matter their politics, should expect honesty from government ministers. And if mistakes are made, they should at least be corrected. If John Swinney won't sack the Justice Secretary, we will give Parliament the chance to have its say with a vote of no confidence. So will the First Minister order his MSPs to support his failing Justice Secretary?
First Minister.
President, it's really important that I make clear to Parliament that the Government has no ability whatsoever, indeed we would break the law, if we tried to close the door of any route of inquiry of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry. And more to the point, Lady Smith would have none of it from the Scottish Government. So it's important that...
Thank you, First Minister. I'm sure members will agree that robust scrutiny is possible without shouting from a sedentary position.
So it's really important that I make clear to Parliament and the public that the Government has no ability to in any way hinder the role of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry. I met Taylor on Tuesday with members of her family, and the first thing I want to set out to Parliament is that I apologised to Taylor because it was obvious to me, from what she said to me, that she had been failed, as so many young people in care have been failed by our care system. That is why we established the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, to ensure that those individuals could find justice. That is why we commissioned the independent review of care. That is why we are taking forward the delivery of the promise to make sure that for care-experienced individuals in our society, they are never subjected to any abuse in the future. That is the commitment of my government. That is the focus of me, all the members of my cabinet, and that's exactly what we'll continue to do.
Thank you. We move to question number 2. I call Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This morning I have lodged a motion of no confidence in Justice Secretary Angela Constance. It is clear that she misrepresented Professor Alexis Jay on an issue as serious as grooming gangs and misled this Parliament. She has had repeated opportunities to apologise and correct the record, but has failed to do so. And despite what John Swinney says, she's had repeated requests from Professor Jay to correct the record, but has failed to do so, and victims do not have confidence in her. It is now clear that she cannot stay in her position. She must resign, or John Swinney must sack her. Why is John Swinney defending the indefensible and refusing to do so?
First Minister.
What I'm doing is setting out to Parliament the substance of this issue and the actions the Government is taking to make sure that we improve the lives of individuals who have suffered in the past as a consequence of abuse in the care of the state. That is what we are doing, and the Government will take forward that agenda.
Ms Sarwar.
It's clear that victims have lost confidence in the Justice Secretary, and it just looks like a First Minister trying to protect one of his own rather than doing the right thing by victims across the country. The rules are clear. Breaching the Ministerial Code is a sackable offence, but this SNP government is addicted to cover-up and secrecy. The truth is that Angela Constance isn't just a stranger to the truth, she is a stranger to competence as well. Our justice system is in utter chaos. Violent thugs have joined the ranks of those being released early from our prisons. A sexual predator is less likely to end up in jail now than 5 years ago. Hundreds of drug dealers go unarrested. Shopkeepers are left to defend themselves from professional gangs of shoplifters, and violent crime is on the rise, with more and more children falling victim. Angela Constance and the SNP are soft on crime, but experts at cover-up. So will John Swinney explain to Scots why this incompetent and untrustworthy Justice Secretary is still in post?
First Minister.
Let me address what I think is the right thing to do. And the right thing to do was what we did. What Angela Constance did in 2015 was to set up the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry when she was the Education Secretary. And there was much resistance to that inquiry, but Angela Constance took the decision to set up that inquiry, and it was absolutely the right thing to do, and I applaud her for taking that decision, the justice that it will bring to individuals. Then on the question of the way in which the criminal justice system is operating, let me just tell Mr Sarwar that the number of people given a custodial sentence in the latest data increased by 13% from 2022-23. Rape and attempted rape convictions at 221 were at an all-time high. This was driven by both high prosecutions and a 10-year high in conviction rate for rape and attempted rape. That is what the justice system is doing just now, standing on the side of victims, making sure that the perpetrators of violence against women are brought to justice, and I'm proud of this government's record in bringing criminals to justice for doing so.
Anna Sarwar.
Victims don't believe you, and they don't buy it. The First Minister talks about doing the right thing in 2015. Do the right thing now. Do the right thing now and sack the Justice Secretary. Because this SNP government is addicted to cover-up, and no issue is out of bounds for their spin. The rules are clear that Angela Constance must go, and victims are clear that Angela Constance must go. And every single person sitting at home watching these pathetic responses from John Swinney knows that Angela Constance must go. But he thinks he knows better. She misled Parliament on the issue of grooming gangs. The Health Minister used public money to be chauffeured to football matches. His predecessor misappropriated public money to watch football on his iPad, and John Swinney, Nicola Sturgeon and Humza Yousaf all wiped their phones during the pandemic.
Let's hear Mr Sarwar.
They don't want to hear it, Presiding Officer. They all wiped their phones during the pandemic, so we will never know what really went on. They think the rules don't apply to them. They think they can always get away with it. Why does John Swinney and the SNP hold the people of Scotland in such utter contempt?
First Minister.
I do no such thing. And what I do in office is I focus my government on making sure that it delivers for the people of Scotland, and it is doing so. So on health, we have the highest number of operations undertaken since the pandemic. In our schools, levels of literacy and numeracy across primary and secondary schools are at a record high. Business investment has exceeded over 10% of GDP for the first time in 20 years in Scotland. Unemployment is lower in Scotland than the rest of the United Kingdom, and child poverty is falling in this country when it's rising in the rest of the United Kingdom because of the focus of my government. So I serve the people of Scotland with every fibre of my body, and I intend to continue doing so.
We move to question number 3. Ross Greer.
Thank you. Across the country, families just cannot get the local services they need. Every day in school, children with additional support needs are being failed by a near total lack of specialist staff. More than 10,000 children will spend this Christmas in temporary accommodation, and far too many elderly and disabled people and their families just cannot get the care packages that meet their needs. At the other end of the spectrum, though, the wealthiest people in Scotland just keep getting wealthier. For all the mistakes that she made in her budget, the Chancellor's mansion tax plans for England will raise hundreds of millions of pounds, but that cash will be grabbed by the Treasury rather than go to local councils. Does the First Minister agree with the Scottish Greens that we could use a Scottish mansion tax to fund local services like education, housing and social care and deliver the support that our communities so desperately need?
First Minister.
Sir, obviously, I recognise many of the challenges and pressures that Mr Greer puts to me about additional support needs. We did, of course, as a consequence of the agreement we reached in the budget last year, in our dialogue with local government, invested more money into additional support needs. We are investing in, we've restored the budget, in fact we've exceeded the previous budgets on housing to ensure that we tackle the temporary accommodation issue, and obviously the greater than real terms support for local government delivered a stronger position, although I accept the pressures to deliver care packages. So the issues that Mr Greer is raising with me are issues that are material to the government's budget, which will be settled in January. I welcome the dialogue that's taking place with the Scottish Green Party. We are open to the ideas and the suggestions that have been made, and we will give them every consideration. But Mr Greer knows from the extensive discussions he and I have had on these issues over the years the commitment I have to investing in public services to meet the needs of the public.
Ross Greer.
I appreciate the efforts that the First Minister and his Finance Secretary have made to take into consideration the budget proposals the Greens have already made. But this is an opportunity that I don't think we can afford to miss. The Chancellor's English mansion tax is definitely overcomplicated and a limited way of achieving a progressive outcome. But it is progressive to tax the wealthiest people in the most valuable houses fairly. 2 years ago, the Scottish Government developed proposals for far more effective changes to council tax for higher bands. If those proposals were dusted down and the changes made to bands F, G and H, it would put a desperately needed £126 million into local services. That's enough for thousands of additional support needs teachers or social care workers. The First Minister surely agrees with the Greens that our local services need more funding and that it's only fair to ask wealthier people to pay their fair share so that we can deliver it.
First Minister.
There's a lot in what Mr Greer said that I agree with, and as he knows, the Government has taken the decision, which of course is not warmly welcomed in Parliament, to ask people on higher incomes to pay more in taxation than they would if they lived in other parts of the United Kingdom, and I think that's the right thing to have done. I think it's exactly the right thing to have done. So we will consider other proposals. Mr Greer knows that he's involved in discussions with the Finance Secretary and the Minister for Public Finance, and obviously I'm fully across those discussions, and we look forward to coming to conclusions when the Government's budget is set out to Parliament in January.
Question number 4, Marie McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the potential implications for its work to eradicate child poverty in Scotland of the UK Government's child poverty strategy.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, any measure taken by the United Kingdom Government that helps us in our work to eradicate child poverty is welcome. The decision to lift the two-child limit that was proposed and pressed for by this Government is welcome. But the UK Government strategy still fails to recognise the damaging impact of benefit cap or the local housing allowance freeze, which only further drive families into poverty. We will continue to engage with the UK Government on these questions, and of course we will be setting out to Parliament in March the next Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, which is our statutory responsibility to do so.
Marie McNair.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Thousands of children are in poverty under Labour because they've kept Tory austerity. They bungled the scrapping of the two-child policy by keeping the benefit cap. So many families with more than 2 children may still be capped. The child poverty strategy was an opportunity for the UK Government to deliver real change, but it's fallen short of the bold action needed. In fact, the United Kingdom House of Commons Library found that if Labour had matched key SNP government policies, they could lift an additional 1.1 million children out of poverty across the UK. While Starmer struggles to get a grip on the ever-growing poverty levels across the UK, what assurances can the First Minister provide to the people of Scotland that the SNP Scottish Government will do everything it can to reduce child poverty here even further?
First Minister.
President Officer, the action this Government is taking is making a real difference, and the focus, I can assure Marie McNair that the Government's focus in Scotland will remain absolutely on eradicating child poverty, and it's a central issue for discussion in the Government's budget. The decision of the UK Government to scrap the two-child limit comes after sustained and concerted pressure from the Scottish Government and charities, and it's welcome. But of course there are other measures needed, and the Government in Scotland will be taking those steps in relation to the budget. I committed that should the UK Government remove the two-child limit, the resources that this Government was going to spend on that would be allocated for other anti-child poverty measures, and I reaffirm that commitment to Parliament today.
Thank you. Question number 5, Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of and the support it is providing to childhood dementia awareness.
First Minister.
I thank Childhood Dementia Scotland, a collaborative partnership of experts and organisations set up by Alzheimer's Scotland, for their work to raise awareness of the issues associated with childhood dementia through their new report. There is clearly more work to be done to understand the causes and the impact of childhood dementia, but what we do know is this is caused by a number of rare genetic conditions. That is why we are collaborating with NHS Education for Scotland and NHS Inform through the Rare Disease Action Plan to improve awareness and understanding of rare conditions among healthcare professionals and the public, and we will of course carefully consider the recommendations set out by Childhood Dementia Scotland.
Miles Briggs.
Thank the First Minister for that answer. At lunchtime, I'll be hosting a roundtable in Parliament alongside Alzheimer's Scotland to discuss the report's findings, which was published yesterday. Most people will not know that, or be aware of these rare genetic conditions that affect almost 400 children here in Scotland and cause symptoms of dementia. The report's provided some really important evidence on prevalence and gaps in support and the impact this is having on families across our country. Despite the courage, though, and resilience of families living with childhood dementia, too many families feel isolated and having to fight for the support that they need, as childhood dementia just doesn't fit into many of the current pathways. So can I ask the First Minister if he and the Health Secretary will agree to meet with myself and campaigners, and for the Government to really consider the key recommendations in the report around childhood dementia being placed in the National Dementia Strategy, as well as developing national standards and better research in Scotland as well?
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Miles Briggs for highlighting this issue and for the important research work that is being carried out, and I welcome the fact that he will be meeting with campaigners and experts on this subject today. I would of course be happy to meet with him and representatives of the organisations with the Health Secretary to look at these questions. Mr Briggs essentially makes an argument which I accept entirely, which is the way through this is not to try to fit individuals into services, but to make sure services meet the needs of individuals, and in this case vulnerable children with acute health requirements. It's what I would call person-centred care, and it has to be at the heart of our health service, and if we embark on our discussions considering how best we can deliver that proposition, then I think we can make progress. But I'm very happy to take forward those discussions.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the First Minister for his words on this matter? In Scotland, there is no framework, consistent referral pathway or single approach to the care of children with dementia. Sadly, 50% of children with dementia die by the age of 10. So does the Scottish Government recognise this as an urgent issue, and would it provide an official response to the Dementia Scotland's recently published report on childhood dementia?
First Minister.
Yes, we will provide that response, and I think the answer that I gave to Miles Briggs will be how I will advise the Government to respond, that it should be in the frame of pursuing person-centred care, because Carol Mochan made the point that, sadly, for many of the children who are affected, their life expectancy is relatively short. So maximising their life expectancy so that every precious moment is available for their families to be with them is so absolutely vital. So I will ensure these issues are reflected in the Government's response to the research work that's been carried out.
Question number 6, Jackie Baillie.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the independent investigation into NHS Scotland by the retired consultant surgeon and former President of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, Mr Mike McCurdy.
First Minister.
So the Government carefully considers all reports on the performance of the National Health Service.
Jackie Baillie.
Presiding Officer, Mike McCurdy's comprehensive report does lay bare the consequences of the lack of delivery in our NHS after almost 2 decades of SNP spin. And despite what the First Minister says, very little has improved under the SNP. Let's take the longest waits. The former First Minister, Humza Yousaf, said he would end waits of over 2 years by September 2022. 3 years on, and thousands of people are still waiting. Now, the First Minister is promising to end all waits over a year in just 4 months' time. But last month, we learned that 11,246 people are still waiting over 2 years. So let me ask the First Minister, who should the public trust? The SNP, who overpromise and always underdeliver, or Mike McCurdy, respected consultant, who says that more of the same will not be enough? Isn't that why Scots cannot afford another 5 years of his failing SNP government?
First Minister.
So before I come on to the substance of Jackie Baillie's question, one of the issues that will affect the performance of the National Health Service is the upsurge in conditions that put incredible pressure on the National Health Service. So today we have had from the Medical Director of NHS England the statement, and I shall read it, from the NHS National Medical Director, Professor Panda of NHS in England. This unprecedented wave of superflu is leaving the NHS facing a worst-case scenario for this time of year. Now, I'm simply saying that the health service will undoubtedly face enormous pressures and waves of cases that will come our way, which is exactly what is happening in relation to performance on accident and emergency because of flu pressures. If it's happening in England, it's likely to be happening in Scotland, and it is happening in Scotland. Now, Mr McCurdy on Monday said that his strongest advice to the health service, to the Scottish Government, should be a relentless focus on delivery. And I want to reassure Jackie Baillie that's exactly what's here just now. That is what is going on, which is why over the period since April, new outpatient waits over a year reduced by 17.9%. In the same period, the waiting list size for new inpatient and day care procedures over 52 weeks has reduced by 26.1%. It's why the number of GPs are increasing, because this government is relentlessly focused on delivery. So there's nothing for Jackie Baillie to worry about, because as we saw from the opinion poll yesterday, nobody trusts the Labour Party on the NHS, but more people trust me and the SNP on the National Health Service.
Emma Harper.
First Minister, the evidence is clear that Scotland's NHS is turning a corner with downward trends across nearly all waiting list indicators. To suggest otherwise does a huge disservice to our fantastic NHS staff, and I suggest that Jackie Baillie and her colleagues think twice of the impact of their scaremongering of our health and social care system in Scotland and how that is having an effect on the wider population, and also perhaps reflects on their own colleagues in Wales and England's own dismal records. before coming to ours.
Let's hear Ms Harper's question.
Can the First Minister advise how the SNP Scottish Government is working to deliver our NHS health service in Scotland to continue to drive down waiting times and invest in a well-funded, well-supported NHS for those who need it?
First Minister.
Well, President Officer, the first thing we do in relation to that point is that we put in place the record financial settlements for the National Health Service, which the Labour Party couldn't bring themselves to vote for in the first place. What we also do is that we put the investment in to make sure we increase GP numbers. We put in the investment to make sure that operations performed at levels we haven't seen since January 2020 before the pandemic. We see an increase in the number of diagnostic tests performed and, of course, as I've just repeated to Jackie Bailey, long waits over a year are down and down for 5 months in a row. So what this government is doing is focusing on the people's priorities. We're tackling the issues in the National Health Service and we're delivering for the people of Scotland.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call Tess White.
Presiding Officer, and this can't be blamed on the super flu. Aberdeen's new maternity hospital is facing further delays, more than a decade after it was first given the go-ahead. The Baird Family Hospital was originally planned to open in 2020, but more setbacks have meant it may not be finished until 2027 at the earliest. That's 7 years late. And millions of taxpayer money has been spent on rectifying design flaws. Local women are paying the price for this incompetence, while staff are struggling to cope with rising waiting times for maternity services, gynaecology, breast screening and breast surgery. First Minister, will you engage with NHS Grampian and visit the site to see for yourself the problems causing these delays?
Always through the chair. First Minister.
Officer, I understand the significance of the points that Tess White raises. Obviously, the safety of NHS facilities is absolutely essential, and in the design phase of the Baird has taken place when we have encountered issues about, which have been raised under the subject of inquiry about hospital constructions that have been completed in other parts of Scotland. So we have to be mindful of the safety issues, which explains a lot of the issues that are at play here. The Health Secretary engages in detail with NHS Grampian to press for the earliest possible progress, because I totally accept the importance of these services being available for Tess White's constituents, and I assure her of that relentless focus on these issues, but we have to be mindful of the safety considerations that must be applied in all cases.
Thank you. Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the significant financial pressures in the voluntary sector with inflationary energy, food costs and, of course, that increased national insurance. It is such that the Scottish Society for Protection of Cruelty to Animals is having to look for voluntary redundancies. In fact, that increase in national insurance is costing alone an extra $400,000 a year. Does the First Minister share my concern that the SSPCA will have to cut its services at the very time post the festive season when there will be an upsurge in demand as unwanted pets given as Christmas presents as a novelty, and when that novelty wears off, they are rejected or simply abandoned? And I declare an interest as convener of the cross-party group on animal welfare.
First Minister.
Christine Graham raises a serious issue, and we are all concerned about the sustainability of the third sector because of the additional costs they are having to meet due to the increase in employee national insurance contributions, which has been a very significant factor for all sectors to deal with, but very significant for the voluntary sector. I'm very happy for the Government to cooperate with the SSPCA in any way that we can to ensure that their important advisory and support services are available at all times during the year.
Daniel Johnson.
The First Minister will be aware that over recent months the University of Edinburgh has been embarking on cost-cutting measures, including 350 voluntary redundancies, salary freezes and reduction in hours. Constituents of mine have brought forward a communication circulated by university where it's outlining the possibility of compulsory redundancies. The UC estimate that this could result in 1 in 8 jobs being lost. But it's not just Edinburgh University. Yesterday, Strathclyde University announced plans for 70 job cuts. So does the First Minister accept that this is the result of long-term underfunding of Scottish universities by the Scottish Government? But more importantly, what does the First Minister say to university workers that will be contemplating a Christmas where they don't know if they'll have a job in the new year?
First Minister.
I think the issues are complex in the university sector because the stance of the UK Government, for example, about migration does not help the university sector. It does not help in relation to the attraction of international students, which is one of the very significant factors that's affected the resources of the university community. I, of course, accept that the Government publicly funds a proportion of university income, and these issues will, of course, be the subject of debate in the budget. But, of course, in the budget last year, Mr Johnson never supported the budget. So the universities would have got nothing, according to Mr Johnson, because he wasn't prepared to support the budget. So I simply encourage Mr Johnson to engage with the Government, and we can all make progress in supporting the universities and supporting their employees into the bargain.
Aki Dunbar.
A new report from the CBI has shown that business investment in Scotland has risen to a 20-year high, in contrast to a fall across the UK. The success for Scotland's economy comes despite the UK Government's tax on jobs and low-growth model. Can the First Minister advise how the Scottish Government plans to build on this momentum and continue to deliver economic growth, even with the limits of devolution?
First Minister.
The report from the CBI is very welcome because it indicates that business investment in Scotland has risen to a 20-year high, in contrast to a fall across the rest of the United Kingdom. That goes alongside the fact that unemployment in Scotland is lower than the rest of the United Kingdom, another indication of the strength of economic performance in Scotland. And, of course, we had the view of the credit rating agencies, which said that Scotland had a strong and diverse economy and it benefited from prudent financial management in the public finances and institutional strength. So I think what this report demonstrates is that Scotland is an attractive place for investment, Scotland is a successful and dynamic economy, and it's got good stewardship of its public finances.
Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Tuesday, I had a very constructive meeting with the Chief Constable, Jo Farrell. She assured me that Police Scotland are complying with the Supreme Court judgment on the definition of the word woman. The Chief Constable told me that Police Scotland did not wait on any guidance from the EHRC, but rather produced their own interim guidance, which is based on biological sex. So can I ask the First Minister again, especially bearing in mind the Sandy Peggy judgment, why has it taken almost 8 months for other public bodies to follow the law?
First Minister.
Well, I think one of the issues that we have been mindful of is the need to ensure that the complex legal judgment of the Supreme Court is correctly and properly applied in guidance. And we've taken those. We've published new guidance in a number of different areas in relation to workplaces within the Scottish Government, in relation to the guidance on schools. That has been published. So there's obvious issues that we have to continue to work through, as we saw in the judgment that was announced at the beginning of the week on Monday in relation to the Employment Tribunal, a further range of complexity that has got to be wrestled with. So I simply reassure Pam Gossel the Government is doing the work to ensure that these issues are properly addressed, and we have already done so in relation to the documents we've published.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I hope that the First Minister will join with me in welcoming yesterday's Supreme Court decision in the Crozier v Scottish Power case, and commend Elaine Veal, whose father, Robert Crozier, died from mesothelioma in 2018, for her unrelenting struggle in an 8-year battle with his former employer, Scottish Power plc, to win this case. So will he join me in condemning the actions of Scottish Power in resisting and obstructing this claim? And will he welcome the fact that on this occasion at least, the Supreme Court has understood the clear intention of this Parliament in passing the Damages Asbestos-Related Conditions Scotland Act 2009?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I think Mr Leonard raises a very important example of the importance of addressing issues that are involved in the damages legislation and the enormous suffering that individuals with mesothelioma have experienced and suffered. So I associate myself very much with the comments that Mr Leonard has made, and I'm glad that this issue has been able to be resolved satisfactorily. But it should not have come to the length that it has come to ensure that that justice could be achieved.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland is an energy-rich country, but people are struggling with sky-high bills to heat their homes. For too many years, Westminster has squandered Scotland's energy whilst failed to provide any meaningful support to people in Scotland to raise living standards. Whilst Westminster is sitting on its hands, can the First Minister advise what steps the SNP Scottish Government is taking to support people on low incomes with their fuel bills this winter? And can he say any more about what we could do differently with the full powers over Scotland's energy with a fresh start of independence?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, over this winter, the Government will invest over £196 million in our winter heating benefits, providing vital support towards the cost of energy for those with a greater need for heat, including low-income households, families with disabled children and young people and pensioners. In addition to this, low-income Scots, including pensioners, will continue to receive our winter heating payments worth £59.75 this winter. These payments are only available in Scotland. So those are some of the measures the Government is taking within its existing powers. Of course, people in Scotland are attracted by the very clear argument that with the enormous energy potential of our country, it is vital that that energy potential benefits the people of Scotland. So with all of the generation capability that we have, it is absurd that we have such high levels of fuel poverty, and it's only the fresh start of independence that will address that issue.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Hospitality and self-catering businesses across the country, already suffering from rising costs, are reeling this week from a rates revaluation that sees, in some cases, a threefold increase in the bills they are likely to face, which they simply cannot afford. Now, I know, and the First Minister knows, the assessors are independent of government, but ministers do set the statutory framework, the rules, the assumptions, the timetables and the methodology under which the assessors operate. So will the First Minister take urgent action to address this issue before yet more hospitality businesses have to close their doors?
First Minister.
I understand the concerns that Mr Fraser is raising with me, and as he correctly says, the assessors act independently on this question. But I am concerned by the detail that I am hearing about some of the decisions that have been arrived at, which is why the Minister for Public Finance is already engaged in considering the implications of these issues and what is driving the changes in the methodologies that are producing these results. So I assure Mr Fraser that the issue has already been addressed by the Government. It is an important issue because it will affect the sustainability of many businesses as a consequence of the proposed changes, and that is being pursued by ministers at this time.
Mercedes Vialba.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 7 prisoners in their second month on hunger strike are now at risk of death due to their deteriorating health condition. They're part of a larger group of political prisoners being held under special terrorism conditions due to alleged association with proscribed group Palestine Action. I oppose the ban on Palestine Action. I support those who have protested against the ban, and I add my voice to the call for their immediate bail while awaiting trial. On behalf of my constituents in the North East region who care deeply about this issue, can I ask the First Minister if he will join me in opposing any curtailing of human rights, intimidation, discrimination and victimisation of those who oppose genocide?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, on the question of human rights and the liberties of individuals, I am a very strong supporter of human rights, and I have deep anxieties about what I am hearing about the consideration that is being given to curtailing the application and the scope of the European Convention on Human Rights within the United Kingdom. I think the obligation to observe ECHR has been one of the great developments during my lifetime, which has strengthened individual rights, and we are the better for it. So I'm concerned by the direction of travel on that question, and I assure Mercedes Vialba of my support on that question. Indeed, I'll be attending a Scottish Human Rights Commission event in Parliament this evening. In relation to the custodial decisions, obviously Mercedes Verbal will appreciate that these are decisions arrived at by the application of law within the United Kingdom, and it would be inappropriate for me as First Minister, who has to observe the rule of law, to make any comment about independent decisions arrived at by prosecutorial or judicial authorities.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My constituent, who is on NHS waiting list, recently received correspondence from NHS Lothian informing them that if they did not confirm within 21 days whether they wanted to remain on the list, they would automatically be taken off. Whilst I understand that this policy is in line with government guidance, I'm very concerned that it may be resulting in a vulnerable patient, such as elderly and those with special educational needs, missing out on essential treatment without their consent. Will the First Minister agree to instruct ministers and officials to review this policy to ensure that vulnerable patients are not being struck off waiting list unfairly?
First Minister.
Well, any individual who requires healthcare treatment should get that healthcare treatment, and that's the simple premise of the National Health Service, and that is applied in all circumstances. Obviously, it is important that we have up-to-date information on the medical conditions of individuals to enable us to plan their treatment, and that is exactly what the National Health Service does.
And Craig Hoy.
Sorry. Thank you, Presiding Officer. SNP-run Dumfries and Galloway Council is today set to vote on the controversial £68.6 million White Sands Flood Defence Scheme, which is opposed by many residents and businesses. The Scottish Government is expected to fund 80% of this project, despite serious questions remaining about its impact and its effectiveness. Given that the Scottish Government faces a massive budget black hole, and Dumfries and Galloway Council could potentially be closing rural schools to deal with its own financial crisis, will the First Minister now withdraw his government's financial support for this project, which looks to do more harm than good for residents, for businesses and for the local economy?
First Minister.
The issue of flooding at White Sands has been a long-term issue, and there has been significant parliamentary and political pressure for there to be a scheme put in place. There have been a number of very well-designed flood prevention schemes put in place in different communities in Scotland that have provided respite for families who are affected. And I simply observe that there is some early weather information that suggests very heavy rain in the southwest of Scotland over the course of this weekend. So there are challenging circumstances out there at all times. Now, obviously, this is a scheme that is being developed. These schemes are developed locally. They are put into a wider discussion across all local authorities to determine funding priorities, and the Government allocates funding accordingly. Now, that is essentially the Government collaborating with a locally based approach to the design of these flood prevention schemes. And what Mr Hoy is asking me to do is to take that power away from local authorities and to decide it in the centre. And normally Mr Hoy rails against the Government deciding on these issues. So I do understand. I've had much correspondence over the years from people who don't like the scheme that's proposed at White Sands, but I simply say that it's important that we listen carefully to the expert advice about what's the right course of action to take on these issues.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a members' business debate in the name of Daniel Johnson, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the public gallery and the chamber to do so.